Hey everyone. It's pretty exciting for me to be here and a huge honor for me to be giving a keynote at this year's All Things Open conference. It's my first time here, so yay for being able to attend for the first time and give a speech. Over the past 7 to 8 years, I've spent my time working for an open source come social enterprise that has its roots in Kenya and have been primarily focused on trying to nurture our open source community from East Africa. So what I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes is share insights from building and using open source software in Africa and the developing world at large, while looking at what opportunities exist for the open source movement as the developing world becomes, increasingly connected. Now I'm going to be referencing Africa, the African continent a whole lot in my talk, in line with my own experiences in the continent over the years. But to start with, let me first give you some historical background into who we are as Ushahidi and how we started. Ushahidi is a Swahili word that means testimony. We are a technology company whose mission is to raise the voices of marginalized groups using technology and help the organizations that serve them to listen and respond better. We were born out of the post-election violence that broke out in Kenya back in 2007, 2008. When results were announced after our general elections, they were largely contested, and what happened then was that violence then broke out across the entire country. The mainstream media was unable to report exactly what was happening in different parts of the country, and the government was also trying to downplay how severe the situation was. And so what a group of Kenyan bloggers did was then set up a web platform that allowed for ordinary citizens to send in text messages, emails, tweets, or use smartphone applications to share messages around what was happening around them. It could be that there were riots in the areas, or there were people trying to break in, or any positive message around the time when that crisis was happening. Essentially giving Kenyans a voice when no one else could or would. Now it's important to note that back then in 2008, the internet worked fairly well in Kenya. And what that did was allowed for people across the entire world who were connected to actually see what was happening in the country. Those of us who are stuck in our houses were able to log in and see that, hey, maybe there's pockets of violence happening in one area as opposed to the other one. It's safe for me to go here. And people who are in the diaspora who wanted to know what was happening to their families back home could also do the same thing, right? Since then, we've seen an exponential increase in the number of connected individuals across the world. Now, this animated GIF shows you progress of connecting undersea fiber optic cables across Africa, Middle East, and Asia between the year 2000 and 2013. I am hoping that this is working. Boo, it's not. The idea is that you are going to see, the chronology of the undersea cables getting connected across the entire African continent. What you're seeing on your screen right now is an image of the African undersea cables in 2018. And from this, you can see that a vast majority of the African continent is actually already connected, right? The percentage of the world's population that is connected to the internet has grown from 4.1% at the end of 1999 to 54.4% as of December last year. That is huge. Now, in as much as the internet connectivity in Africa is not as high as in some of the other continents, its internet capacity growth is much faster than anywhere else in the world. Users in Africa are up by about 20% every year. In Kenya alone, we're seeing internet penetration having grown from 0.7% to 89.4% in the last 10 years. This is according to research by the Communications Authority of Kenya. And I think one of the reasons why this is the case is, there's increased broadband accessibility, primarily because of the affordability of mobile phones and the penetration of mobile phones within my country. I mean, for example, my granddad in the village has access to a smartphone and is able to get connected on WhatsApp. That is huge. And he lives in an area where there's no electricity. So that in itself speaks to how connected people are getting. Now, as the world became increasingly connected, we've also seen use of the Ushahidi platform grow as well in that time. In the last 10 years, we've seen this platform of ours being used more than 150,000 times across 3 categories of social impact, namely political crisis, for example, the Kenyan election we were born out of, citizen advocacy and human rights mapping, as well as crisis response. So when you think the Haiti earthquake, the Nepal earthquake, and the hurricanes here and there, the platform has been used for those instances. We've been able to collect more than 50 million reports from citizens across the globe, across 160 different countries. And the beautiful thing about this is that this is a tool that was built in Africa, a tool that was born out of problems you always tend to associate with Africa: low bandwidth, bad governance. And the philosophy that helped us kind of, build this platform in order for it to be able to, reach that many people is we employed a mobile-first approach. The mobile phone is the most ubiquitous tool. It's the one thing that everybody has access to. When you get in trouble, you pick up your phone to call someone, right? And so we innovated around a tool that people already have access to and lowered those barriers of entry, those barriers of communication. And we basically thought that if it works in Africa, it'll work anywhere. That's a story for another day. If you want me to talk about that a little bit more, you can find me after today's talk. In the recent State of the Octoverse 2018 report, GitHub reported having more than 8 million new developers join the community. New signups sped up across Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia in particular. You can see there, Egypt is a third, and Nigeria is a close fourth, right? So you can see this does validate the fact that as we continue to get increasingly connected, that there's increased uptake of open source tools. But what's catalyzed this uptake of open source across the world? In my opinion, it's a combination of two things. I'm going to explain this first one, which is what we call the Pothole Theory, right? And the basis for this theory is that it takes an event or something that affects you directly to make you go over and beyond to actually act. And I'm going to use an example that's a little closer to home for all of you right now, right? There's news across the entire world around people going out to vote for this upcoming election in the US, right? Now for us, it's news and it's important, right? But for those of you who are based here in the United States, because it directly affects you because of the decisions the Senate is taking, you feel a little bit more empowered to go out, either go run campaigns or call your senators, etc., just to try and get people to actually go out and make an informed decision. For those of us staying back home in Africa or those of us in Kenya, it's good for us to know, but then there isn't much that I'll be able to do when I'm sitting back home in my computer, right? News about a pothole getting fixed right outside my street at home will be something that will make me jump up and down, because every day I'm driving across a pothole, I'm either getting bumped up in my car or I have to constantly take my car to get fixed. So it really does capitalize on the fact that we're seeing a lot more people becoming empowered to fix their own problems in their own communities and not sit around and wait for somebody else to come in, solve it for them. Now, the second bit, which is connected to this, is that I think the reason why people are becoming a little bit more empowered and feeling like they can actually jump in and try and sort out situations in their communities is, in actual fact, because of increased connectivity, right? Because of them being, getting online, feeling like they can share their opinions, getting to see what the other groups of people are doing. There is a direct correlation between increased connectivity and uptake of open source tools across the world, which is why I think that connecting the next billion has become such a huge priority for the world, with expectations of profound impact on the global economy. So what opportunities does this present in particular for the open source community? Improved accessibility. Now, making the Ushahidi platform open source when we began was a deliberate effort by the Ushahidi founders to make it accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world, and lower barriers of use of that technology, right? Being able to collect more than 50 million reports, have this platform get used in 160 countries more than 150,000 times is not something that would have happened if this was not a tool that was made open source. It would never have happened if you only made the tool available in the English language, right? We really, partnered with different organizations, empowered our community to jump in and help us translate and make it accessible in different languages to make it much easier for them to make use of. Again, lowering the barriers of entry or lowering the barriers of use of technology. And what happens when you lower these barriers is that you see exponential growth. And I think that we'll actually continue to see more uptake of open source tools across the world. Now I'm going to reference the Octoverse report one more time. GitHub's growth in new signups in the last year is the largest seen in the first 6 years of GitHub combined. As of September 30th this year, more open source projects had been created in the Asian region than anywhere else in the world. Just yesterday during the diversity and inclusion event, we were in a breakout session around creating safe spaces. And one of the people in our group actually mentioned or spoke about a fast-growing Node.js community in Nigeria, right? It's grown so big that they've actually started their own chapter of Node.js in Africa, right? One of the other opportunities that open source presents for the developing countries as we continue to get connected is being able to build capacity and create employment opportunities. Let me explain why. Contributing to open source provides a unique opportunity for people to learn new skills, which also helps them to build a professional reputation. Now, according to a free and open source survey that was conducted a couple of years back, 30% of the people who participated in that survey said that they participate in open source to improve their job opportunities. Another 30% said that, them participating, actually, they were able to directly derive income from participating in open source projects. And another 18% indirectly deriving income, perhaps from visibility on working on a project that leads to them getting a job. One of the sustainable development goals revolves around decent work and economic growth. Sustainable economic growth will require societies to create conditions that allow for people acquiring quality jobs that stimulate the economy. And I think that the open source movement definitely provides a unique opportunity to helping to solve youth unemployment in the developing world, which casts a huge shadow on economic growth. When we started Ushahidi, it was primarily focused on crisis management. So when you look at the very first example, it was a crisis. It was, electoral violence, trying to figure out how to sort out that situation. But over the years, as the tool ended up getting used, what we've seen is that it got adapted for various use cases, right? From election monitoring to tracking cases of sexual harassment in Egypt and in India. And that has also supported creation of new business social ventures and opportunities in those regions to support that kind of work. Now, I'm going to reference a harassment example specifically because it's one that's pretty special, pretty close to my heart. Back in 2010, a group of women who were working and living in Cairo were tired of the constant harassment that they would experience in the streets. And so what they did was came together to then set up the Ushahidi platform to help them document cases of sexual harassment happening against women, right? Now, back then when they started off, it was primarily focused on trying to create awareness about what was going on, right? But then over time, as it picked up traction, the conversation moved away from creating awareness because now people, knew about it, into how do we create behavioral change, right? How do we, move the conversation away from this is happening to how exactly do we actually solve the problem? Now, what we've seen over the last 10 years is that they've actually invested in trying to do a lot more research into this kind of behavior. We've also seen a lot of other different countries across the entire world trying to replicate that same model of tracking cases of sexual harassment. And that team in Egypt is now focused on trying to come up with a replicable model. So using all the lessons that they've learned over those years to document, what strategies do you need to employ to, whether it's creating partnerships or, actually doing outreach, etc. And then going as far as, what do you need to do to customize it within your own local contexts. And in that way, they've been able to form, an organization around how to actually do that work, a social venture. So to me, the beautiful thing about open source software and open systems is the fact that it's generative by nature. It provides a framework or a skeleton upon which people can build on top of and adapt to their local contexts. It allows for people to take these tools, make them their own, and use them in ways that we could never imagine without having to start from scratch. Entrepreneurs can build value-added products on top of open source, giving startups quicker time to market while lowering development costs. Now my timer is at 30 seconds. Let's hope I can finish in 30 seconds. But I am at the end. I think in general that there's a huge paradigm shift that's been happening. The information landscape is rapidly changing. We're no longer looking at groups or individuals from developing countries as passive recipients or users, but active participants and contributors to solving problems in the communities in innovative ways. We've always imagined the developing world as a place that receives technology and innovation, but I think that's going to shift as we see more and more contribution coming up from the developing world. Now really is a time for us to invest in building and fostering open source communities in the developing world and nurturing the culture of innovation at a local level. Thank you so much for your time.